This is Newsmax TV. I'm Ashley Martella. Caring for a loved one with a chronic, perhaps terminal illness is a role that many of us are unprepared for, but find ourselves cast into frequently at a time when we feel we're least able to deal with it. Our special guest has written a superb and compelling new book that is, in essence, a step-by-step guide on what to do and how to do it. World-renowned author and literary journalist Gail Sheehy has first-hand knowledge of it, having spent 17 years supporting her husband, legendary magazine editor-publisher Clay Felker. She details what she went through, the full range of emotions, including the 8 crucial stages of caregiving, and the great support network that's so important in dealing with this very difficult emotional roller coaster. The book is entitled Passages in Caregiving. Welcome to Newsmax, Gail.
I'm happy to be with you.
You've written 15 books, including this one. Now, several of them deal with stages of life. Your book, Passages, was a national bestseller. How is this book different from the others?
Well, the funny thing is that when I wrote Passages, I was in my 30s, so I stopped parsing the stages of adult development at 50. Because I thought at that time, well, what happens after 50 that's interesting? How quaint that is. Actually, we go through more passages after 50 in what I call our second adulthood than we do in our first adulthood. And one of them that we're usually not prepared for, not expecting, not trained for, is a passage to caregiving. I wasn't prepared. I suddenly, you get the call in the middle of a busy life when you're pursuing your passion or your children are on their way and you think, wow, I have all this free time, and suddenly you get the call. And it's a call from a doctor or from your spouse or from your mom, or it's a call about a fall. Dad's fallen, maybe he's had a stroke or he's run through a red light and hit somebody, but he doesn't quite remember how it happened, and you say, is it his mind? Or could it just be his eyes? And maybe you don't even want to know because you know you're not going to win the argument about the car keys. And suddenly you're thrown into a role which people don't identify with. It's family caregiver. And usually it goes on for at least 5 years with the needs escalating. So I had to write this book to say, you don't have to give up your own life. You can't. Because if you do, you probably will get sick yourself, and then there won't be anybody to do the caregiving.
In your book, you make frequent reference to the call, as you refer to it. Is that a life changer?
Totally a life changer, because if it's a parent, all of a sudden you have to begin to think that, you're going to have to be the authority. You're actually going to have to convince mom or dad that you can help make decisions with them, instead of just being the child who takes, who is protected. That's a hard transition to make. And I've just been talking today to people in South Florida about this, and one young man came over and his father was in the audience, and he said, I don't know how to talk to my father about this, because he just said, everything's fine, I've got all the financials taken care of, everything is in trust, you don't have to worry. And he said, I'm not worried about the material things, I'm worried about how do I take care of my father when he needs it? And how can I do it without giving up my own life? And that's what I write about in the book.
You refer to 8 turnings around the labyrinth of caregiving. What do you mean by that?
Well, I see caregiving as a circular process. It's not like stages of life. And so there are common turning points that I've learned from traveling over the country and interviewing hundreds, even thousands of caregivers who found creative solutions. And the first one is shock and mobilization. You're just calling doctors. And what I say is interview doctors. Take a tape recorder in so that you can help, because the patient won't remember. And you need to know, you're going to be talking to other doctors, and you want to find a medical quarterback who can bring together the whole care team and make sure that the tests and the information circulates around the whole group. And then you move into the new normal. This is a time to get your financial house in order, to see an elder care attorney, because how you move assets around may make all the difference about whether or not ultimately in long-term care you can get your parent on Medicaid. But you have to set that up in advance. And then you move into the boomerang. Boomerang is there's another health crisis. And now you may need a care manager, because now you begin to negotiate the complexities of our healthcare system, which is broken in so many places. And it moves on. One of the major turning points is playing God. I found myself there too. You begin to think you're the only one responsible for taking care of this person and saving them from disaster or death. And if you go too far into that, eventually something will go wrong. And if you're God, you'll think it's your fault. It's not. You know, there is a God, but you have to realize you are not it. You can only do so much against aging and disease. And then a really important turning for caregivers is coming back. You know, when you see that your loved one is not going to come back, but is going to be more and more dependent and needy, you need to begin to prepare a new path for yourself. Because if you go to the end of caregiving and you're totally focused on just taking care of this one person and giving up yourself, you're left with a vacancy. One man who took care of his wife with MS for 10 years finally hired somebody to help him on weekends. He went out and got in his car on a Saturday morning and he couldn't remember where he liked to go or what he liked to do. So you have to pick up the activities that you love, friends that you may have lapsed out because you've been isolated, writing, painting, music, sports, whatever it was that gave you joy. You have to begin doing that again, at least an hour or two every day, instead of waiting until the very end.
And of course, the long goodbye is the last one. And
the long goodbye is the last one, and that is the biggest problem for most people because it may last for years or even decades, because all of our illnesses now, even cancer comes and goes, as it did with my husband 4 times over 17 years. Diabetes has a long history. Autoimmune diseases, Alzheimer's. People live with Alzheimer's for 20 years and it has stages. And you have to be prepared for, this may be a long-term thing, so you have to build a circle of care and start from the beginning. And the best thing to start with is to have the conversation with your siblings even before shock and mobilization, because you think siblings might be the greatest help, but they actually can create the greatest stress if you wait until one person gets stuck with the whole responsibility and begins to feel resentful.
Let's talk about your husband, Clay Felker, for a moment. The reader gets the impression from your book that he was a very, very strong person. And it was very touching. You write in that chapter near the end that he got all dressed up one night and you took him to Lincoln Center for a jazz concert. And when he got home, you guys got home, he said to you that was a magical evening. Now, how much did his inner strength factor into your decisions and your ability to deal with this real life tragedy?
Well, because we started off by being partners in fighting this enemy from the beginning. And the second time the cancer came back, we actually changed our lives. We took a year to figure out how to do it, but we had to get him back in action again. And so we found that he loved identifying and shaping young talent. He found an offer at University of California, Berkeley, journalism school. What it meant was we had to tear up the lives we'd spent decades building in New York publishing and move to Northern California and start over again in our 50s and 60s. But doing that gave him an extra 15 years of life. And it replenished our love and our sense of the future. Starting over again. Don't take life-threatening illness as a death sentence. It isn't today for the same reason that people do live for decades often with illnesses that used to be death sentences.
Okay, let's take a caretaker dealing with a loved one who's perhaps not as strong as your husband was, maybe someone who's given up. How does someone manage that?
You have to stimulate the person. You call a family meeting. Get everybody who's involved in the family together and say, what can we do to bring mom back to life? She's lost her husband. She's lost her eyesight. She can't drive anymore. How can we, create a circle of care so that one or another of us is contacting her or seeing her every day so she feels loved and cared for, taking her out. People can even travel when they have, pretty serious illnesses. There are now travel companies that will, find transportation for you so you can take people elsewhere. And the people that I interviewed who did create a family meeting and did, manage to see and be involved with mom or dad would bring them back from the point where they had given up on life to actually being much better.
We read that your husband befriended a rabbi toward the end of his life who apparently impacted his remaining days positively. How important is religious faith in caregiving?
Very important, very, very important, because the person is preparing for moving into another life that we don't really have information on. And the caregiver needs that too, because the caregiver needs some comfort in knowing that the person they're loving and taking care of is going to feel at ease about that transition. But it doesn't have to be a religious person. In this case, it was an ecumenical counselor that came through hospice who turned out to be a rabbi. And my husband was able to tell something to her that he never told anybody in his life. And he felt so much better. And then he mentored her on a little disability that she had. So he felt valuable again, and it was a real give and take.
Okay, we go back to the call for a moment. You mentioned in your book that it's very important not to necessarily accept the grim prognosis from the first doctor as the gospel truth.
Absolutely. It happens so often. And someone may be just in a hurry to get you out of their office, or they want you to sign up with the surgeon, give him blanket consent to take anything out that he needs to. Well, maybe he doesn't need to take something out. So you need to get 2 or 3 consults. And then you need to pick one of those doctors to be your medical quarterback and help you sort through the care options and help you assemble the care team. And then let the doctor know you're willing to schlep the tests around from one doctor to another, but you want to make sure that your quarterback informs the other doctors who are in on the case so that they're all working together as a team.
How do you deal with that helpless, hopeless feeling of being told that your loved one has a terminal illness?
Terminal illness may not mean that this is going to happen in the next year or even 10 years or 15 years. I think what you do is you start investigating. You might want to call a researcher to look up that illness worldwide and see what are the new protocols, what are the new treatments. There are new treatments for cancer that are being pioneered down here in southern Florida. You may not know that if you're in Columbus, Ohio, but if you get either a care manager or a researcher, they'll be able to give you a lot of alternatives and exhaust those alternatives before you take the most radical treatment.
How important are hospices in these situations?
They are enormously important, and they're underused. Most people don't call hospice in until the last weeks or the last days of a person's life. Actually, you can be on hospice for 6 months and then you get better, and then you can be readmitted, and you can be on hospice for 3 or 4 years. And what it does is brings in a team that makes it possible to do care at home. And most people want to live their last years at home and be taken care of there. And you'll get a doctor, you'll get a visiting nurse, you'll get a social worker, you'll get a spiritual counselor, you'll get volunteers who can take the person out. It changes the whole quality of life, because it's really about supporting the best quality of life you can for all the months or even years that one has left.
All right, you traveled around the country interviewing caregivers and others for this book. Do you think there are ways the U.S. can better deal with end-of-life issues? And if so, what are they?
Oh, we are not even dealing with end-of-life care issues in most cases. We have acute care hospitals and emergency rooms. That's fine for serious illness that's acute. We have hospice for end-of-life care. We don't have anything for the in-between stage that people can afford, middle-class people. Caring for somebody at home and providing outside home care aides is enormously expensive. It can be up to $15,000 or $20,000 a month. I think one of the ideas that I talked with your editor-in-chief about was opening immigration to bringing in more people who are skilled in nursing, because we have a nursing crisis and we need to have people who can do home care, who are not wildly expensive, but who can actually monitor people who have health problems so that they don't have to go to the emergency room and through a whole lot of expensive tests, which are much more expensive for the taxpayer.
Again, the name of the book, Passages in Caregiving. Gail Sheehy, thanks so much for talking with us here at Newsmax, and good luck with that book. It's a great read.
Thanks so much.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.